You're listening to the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast. Remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, and click the bell to make sure you get the latest episodes of the podcast. Be sure to like and share our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. Hi everyone and welcome back to another episode of the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast. Joining me on today's cricket discussion is Tony Bishop and the Bear, who are members of Guerilla Cricket. Guerilla Cricket is based in England and is the world's leading independent cricket broadcaster. It all began with a live ball-by-ball cricket commentary service and is all-round cricket entertainment movement with live stream special broadcasts and coverage of international cricket. It gives me great pleasure to welcome Tony Bishop and the Bear. Welcome, guys.
Hi.
Hello.
Thrilled to be here.
It's great to have you here and to speak about Guerilla Cricket and pretty much your journey and what it's all about and the work that you do. So I'm sure everyone's looking forward to listening and watching this episode of the podcast today. And let's get into it. And as I do with all my guests, Tony and the Bear, I like to take them back to their cricket memories, their earliest cricket memories, how they got into the game. And it's been very fascinating listening to people's recollections about how they got into cricket. So the question I have for both of you guys is, what are your earliest memories of watching, going to the cricket, and some of the players that you looked up to as idols? Who wants to go first?
Bear, do you want to go first?
All right, I'll go first. I vaguely remember the 76 series against the West Indies, but I'm not sure if that's just the trickery of the mind. It was a very hot year in England, and I vaguely remember that. But the series that really turned me on to cricket was the 81 Ashes, Botham's Ashes. I vividly remember watching the Headingley Test. I mean, I didn't really understand the game so much. And I was probably, I was 10. I'd have been 10 that year. But obviously, back in those days, we had two TV. Did we have three TV? We had three TV channels then in 1981, didn't we? We didn't have Channel 4 by then. We had three TV channels, and during the summer, the BBC had the cricket on all day long, which was during the summer holidays. And obviously, as a bored kid, you got into that, and it sparked an enthusiasm in me. My brother was already into cricket, although he scared me because I remember him coming back from. We used to have like lunchtime school clubs at school, and he'd gone to one and come back with a bloody mouth and someone had thrown a cricket ball in his face. So I was always scared of fast bowling after that because I never wanted to get hit because he just had his face rearranged by a cricket ball.
I can understand, yeah.
But
especially no helmets back in those days.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, that was where my enthusiasm for cricket was sparked, and then all through the year, then I started playing and I became a bowler, and I was playing a very good side of my school. We had a load of players. We were all playing sort of youth level, county level at the same time. There's about 6 or 7 of us all in my school side, and my club side was very similar. And so I kind of grew up for about 5 or 6 years there where cricket was the be all and end all. You know, as a timer, I thought, I want to be a professional cricketer. You know, it was that kind of enthusiasm for it. I was down the nets virtually every day of the week, playing 3 or 4 times a week. You know, it's all that. And that's where it all started for me. It's God's game.
Yeah, it is. It's a great game. It's a great game. And that's interesting hearing your recollections, Bear. Tony, what about your recollections?
Well, Bear started sort of more internationally. I was probably more club level. So I'd played all through school for my school team. I played for a club called Old Lyonians, who were my old school old boys, which I think was sort of Middlesex League. So I'd always played, but I think from a watching perspective, I kind of started more at county level. And when I used to live out in a place called Rickmansworth, I could jump on the Metropolitan line into Baker Street, and then Baker Street either walk up or get the train up to St John's Wood. So right from the age of sort of 11 or 12, I'd spend my Sunday afternoons going to watch John Player league games. If you remember that many years ago, you won't, because it was a long time ago. But you used to see, but Middlesex would be playing, they'd be playing all the other counties, but there was some incredible overseas talent that used to be part of those that you could routinely see close up on a Sunday afternoon, both on live TV and at the ground. So I'd go and watch the likes of Clive Lloyd. I'd go and watch the likes of Barry Richards, and seeing sort of that kind of talent close up on a regular basis on Sunday afternoons that was my sort of gateway drug to being full on hooked to all forms of watching the game, really. So wherever I go, wherever I travel, I try and ensure that I can take in some cricket, assuming where I'm going is cricket season, and sort of make sure that I never miss an opportunity to, at all different levels of the game. I don't really mind whether it's test match or club level. I just like to make sure I can see some cricket wherever I go.
That's right. It's the same with me, and I think I can relate to you, Bear, and Tony, being a cricket tragic. I'm a full-on cricket tragic myself. Anyone who knows me, I'm always watching the cricket, always talking about cricket, can't stop thinking about it. Even listening to cricket in my sleep, trying to make me go to sleep.
Yeah, I was going to say, is that us when you were... We're about the right time for it to be night time for you.
No, I think that's just what the game does, isn't it? It hooks you.
Yeah, it does.
It can be a frustrating game sometimes, can't it?
Wasn't that the famous old Geoffrey Boycott story? I can't remember who asked him. Oh, it was Jonathan Agnew asked him, didn't he? He said, "Didn't you put a few people to sleep in your time, Geoffrey?" To which his reply was, "Aye, but I was still batting when they woke up."
Well, he was old school, wasn't he, Geoffrey?
He was.
Yeah, he was. Bloody Geoffrey.
Rate of like 20 or something, whereas now it's like 150. You know, if you have a strike rate of 20 now these days, it would say you're no good in T20 cricket.
No.
What are you doing? You need to strike it at 150, 200, like Maxwell.
Do you know what? He keeps appearing in my notes, my cricket notes. I'll tell you why. Because quite often, when you look back in history, a lot of teams will have played their first ODI against England. Certainly, it's true of Australia, and I'm pretty sure it's true of West Indies, actually. So I always have a look at, when I'm doing notes prep, what was the first international game they ever played? Because quite often that's a Rich Seamer conversation. And if it was England, then quite often it would have been in the 70s and it would have been Boycott. So I always look at Geoffrey Boycott's figures. He never made any runs, but it's normally like scored 3 off 28 balls or 3 off 30 something balls. So Geoffrey keeps turning up in these first ever ODI games, not for a huge accumulation of runs, but by the fact that he scored not very many and loads and loads of balls to get not very many. Anyway,
didn't he bowl in a World Cup final?
He may well have done, and probably with his cap on.
With a cap,
yeah.
I think he got a couple of wickets, I think, looking back.
No, he does.
With his cap on backwards in that instance.
Yeah, that was right. Yeah.
Well, yeah, you wouldn't be doing that back then. That's unfashionable and cool, whereas now today it's cool. Yeah, sort of my generation, people in the 20s, wear your caps back, jeans ripped up and all that stuff. I don't see what the point is, really. Well, I suppose the world changes, doesn't it?
It does.
Even watching cricket like yourselves, it's changed pretty dramatically.
Yeah, certainly has. In the last
well, I think just look at the formats that didn't exist before. You now go down to T10. You've got the 100. You've got dominant. I can recall when everyone thought just one day cricket was some newfangled thing to wear strange clothing and it'll never catch on type mentality.
Yeah.
So I try and remind myself of that when I get very upset and antagonized by what I see as sort of marginalizing the longer form of the game, which is something that massively concerns me. I always try and put things through a sort of if I go back 50 years and think when changes were made, what did people say then? And they were saying much the same kind of things. I still think I do still have those worries, I might point out, but I always try and recall the initial reaction to changes.
Well, there's that perennial thing that everyone thinks that Test match has been dying for 100 years, but it still persists. I mean, we've just had the World Cup and Australia won, which is kind of, as an Englishman, it was a little bit, But I have to say, it was
great to see England do so poorly, Bear.
Oh, well, I can imagine as an Australian that was highly enjoyable. Yeah, but it was quite fun actually watching India's sort of crestfallenness, if you want to call it that, after filling the Modi Dome with 130,000 expectant fans, and it looked like it was going to be a procession, and then they managed to screw it all up right at the end.
Well, that's pressure.
Yeah, it is. And I did wonder whether that would happen. I mean, it was a tricky one for me. India at home. I'm starting to dislike India mainly because I dislike Modi and like, you know, he's want to bring politics into it. I don't like nationalism at the worst, and India seems to be going down that route with the BJP and all that sort of stuff. So I don't particularly. I like Kohli and I like the team, but I don't like where India is going as a country, I guess. And then Australia, the old enemy. So watching them lose would have also been joyous. It was a tricky one. It was a very tricky one, but in the end, I suppose it was quite nice because it was quite nice having to watch Modi looking totally disinterested, having to hand the trophy over to Pat Cummins was quite.
That was
funny.
a bit awkward. Yeah.
It was very awkward.
Very awkward.
It was very funny.
He's like, "Here you go. There's the trophy," and then Pat's just
exactly.
Like, can you turn the lights up? Turn the lights out before you go.
Turn the lights up. And, you know, we'll leave the key under the mat. You can let yourselves out.
That did seem to display something of a lack of class to me, I've got to say.
Yeah.
The way that whole thing was done. It was so clearly geared to be a celebration of India. And
of course.
It just went horribly wrong, didn't it? Not from an Australian perspective, I might point out.
Well, we're going to talk about the World Cup a bit later on.
Okay.
So that's a bit of a preview for that. But we got you guys on to talk about Guerilla Cricket because I've been watching you guys for a couple of years, since 2020 when the West Indies and England played. You just popped up randomly in my YouTube feed. And I was like, this looks pretty interesting. I might as well go have a look. And then you guys are great. You know, you bring a different perspective on the game. It's something different. You know, people get tired of modern day commentary and want something different. So, you know, during the World Cup, I had you guys on as well as watching the coverage because I just like hearing the banter and you're just talking and discussing cricket, which is great. So I just want to touch on that, how it all started. Bear, you can tell us that. How did it all start, Guerilla Cricket?
God, I mean, I've been doing this now since 2009, which is, God, a long time.
That's a long time.
It's a long time. Started off with Norcross from Test Match. He's now at the BBC with Test Match Sofa. Likes of Atif Nawaz and people like that. Started off doing Test Match Sofa back in 2009. That was quite successful. Early years of Twitter and all this kind of thing. There wasn't Facebook, wasn't big in those days, so it was purely audio. Trying to get on air was a hell of a lot different in terms of bandwidth and the amount of listeners you could have. But Twitter had just taken off, and we got onto that, and we successfully did a few series. Originally, we were just going to do the 2009 Ashes. Then we enjoyed it so much, we decided to carry on, and it just went by series, and we picked up a few more people. And then by 2012, 2011, we got bought by the Cricketer magazine, which we all thought was going to be a big step up, you know. But it turned out to be a bit of a nightmare for a year and a half, 2 years. I don't think they really realised what they got, didn't know how to utilise it properly.
They had something potential and they sort of let it go.
Well, they were too stuffy. They didn't, you know, we were out there on a, you know, out in the outfield, and they wanted to be in the centre ground, you know, being all establishment, and we were never establishment. And the guy that was running us wanted us to sort of come down to the establishment. But you know, the problem was, if you're not, you know, you watch TV commentary and you watch all this commentary, and all they do now is go after ex-pros, right? Hardly anyone is not an ex-pro, and so if you're trying to compete with that as someone who doesn't know, and everyone who's listening to that wants that perspective of the ex-pro, even though all of us play cricket, understand the game like a game of chess or whatever, and have a perspective, the respect you get in that circle with everyone else going around is never going to be the same as if we're doing it from our own point of view. And they were trying to shoehorn us into that. And we didn't fit there. We don't fit there. We're not that. We are the fans' eye view, you know, much like the grade cricketer, all these people. You know, you've got a perspective. You have a point of view that is relevant. But if you try and put you next to Pommy and Bangwa, not that he's a great example, but, you know, and those sorts of people will think you don't know as much as them, which I don't necessarily is true. You might not have played that game, but you understand the tactics.
You have a different perspective.
What's going on.
I think
you have a different perspective, but you still understand the game, and you know what's going on, and you can see what's happening, you know, but people don't give you that respect. So they kind of went down that route, and it all ended up horribly, basically. Meanwhile, Dan was surreptitiously getting himself in with the BBC, and then kind of dumped us all. So we ended up going to a meeting with the board because they'd given us, a few of us, some shares, and we tried to buy our name back, Test Match Sofa, because they owned the name then. and we had about $3.5 worth of shares, and they had nothing really going on.
Mm.
Because we wanted the Twitter feed, because at that point we had nearly 30,000 Twitter followers, I think, on Test Match Sofa, which is more than we've got now on Gurerilla, because it was new and people were following us, right? So we wanted to get our Twitter feed back and things like that, and they just wouldn't play ball. They wouldn't sell it back to us. So and then they asked us not to do any broadcasts, and we kind of sat there and went, yeah, all right. And then immediately the four of us who'd gone to that meeting went and sat in a cafe opposite and said, no, fuck that, India are coming to England this summer. Let's go and do that. So we started up. And then fortunately, the guy who'd let us, we were in the last studio we were in, was a big cricket fan, and he let us carry on in that studio, which was above a bar in central London, and it was a proper TV studio.
Pretty convenient, isn't it?
It was a proper TV studio type place. It was a cheap one, but it was a space to do, and they didn't charge us, and they wanted our content. So we carried on in there, and we started off again, and we just carried on from there. And it was tricky for the first couple of years. We didn't have a home. We went from there, we went to the bar to do the Ashes after they got kicked out of the studio because they were selling the building for redevelopment. And then the bar let us do the Ashes live in 2015 from the bar, which was absolutely hilarious, although I became an alcoholic for 3 months. And it was not good for my health.
No.
And then from there we went to Katie, who was one of our presenters, which we went her flat for a couple of years, and then my flat became available where we are now, which is a studio which we've been in since 2016. And having a stable base and having enough patrons and people who like us enough to give us enough money every month to be able to make it a sort of cash neutral venture, although we're never going to make any large amount of money out. Well, maybe we will one day, but at the moment we don't. Has allowed us to continue. And it's been a very joyful experience. Getting the first Test match in Ireland, getting the rights to that was fantastic. Things like that you can never imagine, but they do happen.
Why did they turn you down? The potential that you had. You could have been doing Test matches like the Ireland, Pakistan.
Oh well,
2018 it was.
Well, I mean, my view is that these things are especially when you think about what we do, which is radio. It's different for TV rights. TV rights are worth a fortune. I genuinely don't think radio rights are worth that much.
No.
And they would be much better off not having. I can understand why big broadcasters feel like this, but obviously from our point of view, it's stupid. I mean, how many people actually listen to? I mean, Test Match Sofa now gets really varied reviews. Some people hate it, some people like it. Talk Sport is exactly the same over here. I mean, you've got Sen over there. SEN, Adam Collins does Sen stuff.
And we've got the ABN as well.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, do you really need rights that are just for you? I mean, why can't you have some sort of people pay into a pot, and you have. I mean, actually, Jared Kimbers talked about this. Why rights should be, especially radio rights, you should just have more broadcasters, because if people want to do it and it's cheap and you can get them in, you might find more people are listening because they have different points of view and they find a service that suits their needs, right? But it's not been that way. It'd be nice to be like that. But I don't know how it is in Australia, but the cricket fraternity here and the cricket journalism seems to be so incestuous, and they're all so up each other's backsides that finding space for new people and letting new people in is not where they're at.
The fact that we got the Ireland rights was big news. I mean, we got a lot of press coverage, but the press all picked up on one aspect of the story, which I guess is partly a newspaper journalist's job, isn't it? You find an angle for a story. And the one they picked up on was that the Airbnb we were staying in cost more than it did to buy the actual rights themselves. So
and they always just go on about the sweariness of us as well, which is basically
they do, which is not So they
not necessarily true.
They find an angle for a story about us by and large, which tends to suit the narrative that they want. And I genuinely would argue that that's not true. I mean, I can't defend the fact that we do sometimes swear, because we do.
Yes.
But the reality is, I think we're pretty informed. I honestly think our biggest point of difference is we're a constant social conversation knitted together by informed and, I hope, entertaining commentary. And that conversation with our listeners and that social aspect of what we do is absolutely central to the way we deliver what we do. It's the way we form, the way we have 3 people on air at any one time. Somebody who will focus on ball by ball, somebody who will focus on summary in a classic way, but also someone whose job is to ensure that whether it's YouTube, whether it's Facebook, whether it's Twitter / X, the conversations that are happening are being responded to and engaged in. And I think our biggest point of difference is that we've done, I think, a really good job of making watching cricket a genuine ongoing conversation and not a monologue.
Yeah.
I think also we're more critical. We can be, and we're more, no doubt we are quite partisan, but we also have, we've got an Indos and Indian, we've got several Australians, so they can be partisan too, which adds to the, a little bit of frisson. But, we can go further than traditional broadcasters will, because we're not afraid to, we don't have anyone to be afraid of, upsetting.
You're prepared to speak your mind.
Yeah, exactly. Which allows our conversations to go maybe further and be more critical at times.
I guess people watching your channel on YouTube can relate to that, because they're just everyday people like yourselves who are just watching a game of cricket and probably share the same views or different viewpoint of the game.
I don't know about you. We found something really interesting, actually, in terms of the different media people listen to us and follow us, or watch us and follow us on. YouTube seems to be sort of developing its own community of people, and that's their preferred medium. And as the conversation flows, and you get your chat just starts streams and streams of people chatting to you, you start to pick out regular names and regular groups among those names who have their own internal conversation. So YouTube seems to be like, there's Camp YouTube, and then over here there's Camp X or Camp Twitter or whatever it may be. And we don't do so much with Facebook these days, but when we did, we'd find the same things there. You'd have different communities of people choosing that medium and kind of acting in a different way. They tended to be different people. Not some people flit across from media to media as suits them, but by and large, you see different types of people. I don't know if you see the same thing for Dibbly Dobbly.
Oh yeah, we have a diverse range of people that tune into our live streams when I'm commentating games of cricket. I just want to have a chat with you and ask you questions. Like, people ask me umpiring questions because obviously I'm an umpire, so I know the laws. So people want to know that. And, people ask me about, what happened with Angelo Matthews and what happened with Johnny Bairstow and the Ashes. Sorry to bring it up, guys, but
I think we all agree he was dozy.
Yeah, he was a little bit dozy. I mean, I never had a problem with that thing with Kerr. I mean, I was upset, obviously, but it was smart. Kerr, it was all in one motion. It was all in one motion, and therefore
like
there was no
Bairstow or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, it still wasn't very sporting,
all
I'll say that,
keepers,
but there was nothing
No.
fundamentally untoward about it, and Bairstow was being very dozy. The Angelo Matthews thing was very weird, though.
Yes, very weird. He shouldn't have touched his strap. If he didn't touch his strap, he would have been fine.
Having touched his strap and his helmet being broken, at that point, the timer should have stopped, because it wasn't his fault. It was a faulty bit of kit.
Maybe a little bit of common sense. As an umpire, you should probably apply that to the laws. That's what you're taught as. From my experience, is to use common sense and use the laws accordingly as you see fit. So these things happen. Cricket's always a controversial game, and it's always going to get. It's like even running out the non-striker, mad cat. Same thing.
Well, DRS and umpiring makes it very interesting these days. You see the same thing in football as well with VAR, which I have to say I hate. I'll accept a degree of human error.
You got to win last night. Not to interrupt.
Yeah, we did win last night. Yeah, there was nothing to do with VAR though. But I think it must have changed massively the way umpires are viewed, in that they do have immediate recourse to technology one way or the other. Even I notice on Cricinfo now, you can click on a little button to check an umpire's performance and how well they've done review wise. I never look too closely at poor old Joel's stats. It might just be so horrifying. You don't want to tell people.
Well, he's still got a place there, so I don't know.
Yeah. And he's head of the ICC development panel or something like that, isn't he, Joel? He's got a seat on the board. But
that's how
but
plays.
as an umpire, to me, it's very interesting. You know, your powers to decision make are moderated now by technology more than yourself. So what you're judged on is a very specific metric of right or wrong, because there is now the ability to say it was right or wrong, whereas historically it was only ever judgment. Therefore, your qualities of personality and man management, and you know, I'm sure players would know. They'd go, well, you could get in this guy's ear a bit, and I won't say buy him a pint, but you know, they ask him about his family and things. That might give you an opportunity, which of course now, certainly in international cricket, is gone, because you always have recourse to technology to give you a definitive yes no answer. The one area that bugs me really on that is the whole area of no balls. I mean, for years, to me, a part of an umpire's job is, you know, you look down, you look up, and you know if a player's bowled a no ball. It always amazes me that you've taken that power out of an umpire's hand. It just seems weird.
Well, I disagree with that. Yeah, I disagree with that, and the fact that so many have been missed over the. I mean, you look at that, particularly that series where Pakistan won in England, where Wasim and Waqar were blowing us away. Like 4 of those wickets were no balls. You know, and I'd rather that, and it is an easy one to actually see from the side. You got a line camera. That's quite an easy one to pull out, and it saves the umpire having to look down and look up and getting decisions wrong.
Yeah, that's right.
I would rather that. I mean, I don't mind the use of technology. I like DRS. I think it's great. Certainly adds a bit. It certainly adds a bit of theatre to the game,
especially umpires' call.
Yeah. Well, exactly. You know,
a real marginal 50-50 decision. Because I spoke to Daryl Harper on the podcast. Great chat that I had with Daryl a couple of years ago, and he said when DRS came in, it wasn't what it was when it first came in. The technology was poor, rubbish. Small TV screens looking at replays. Back then they didn't have the ball tracking projection, so the umpire had to make an estimation whether or not the ball was going to hit the stumps. You remember that back in the early days that they had that with ball tracking?
Yeah,
that
I think
you only do half of it, and it won't do the fully of it hitting the stumps. It will stop, and then the third umpire will have to make his decision whether or not it was going to hit the stumps or not. So the system's changed dramatically. But what he said, it definitely changes your perception as an umpire, because he said, I was given out LBWs that were just clipping the leg stump. But if I was given that with DRS, it's too risky, bit of a gamble. So I just give them not out if it's going down.
It works in both batsmen and bowlers' favour. It definitely works in the umpire's favour, because it says even the best technology cannot, with 100%.
Well, it's sort of a fallback
accuracy, predict the flow of a ball that stopped flowing.
Yeah.
So if it's been diverted off a pad or smacked into a pad and stopped, the mechanics of a cricket ball cannot be with 100% complete accuracy predicted.
Yeah.
So and it gives umpires a degree of discretion and indeed respect as well. So yeah, I'm all for umpires' call. It's a remarkably common sense and effective measure.
Yes, I think during this World Cup, and we'll talk about it a bit later when we talk about the World Cup, but they had some problems with ball tracking as well. Some were a little bit.
Well, it seems to me that if the ball, it's the ones where the ball is virtually a half volley on the pad, especially with spinners and stuff, where it doesn't have the time to react. The ball doesn't really grip. Well, it does, but then it hits the pad so quickly that you don't see the amount of movement that the ball has, and then it has a completely different trajectory to what you'd imagine it has, and then you do get the odd one that looks a bit suspicious. But I think you have to wear with that, don't you? I mean, it's the nature of technology. I'd rather it was there than it wasn't.
Yeah, it was like with David Warner when he went off at that one in that game against Sri Lanka. They clipped the leg stump, and he wasn't too happy about it. It works.
Yeah, the same thing happened. The same thing happened to Bairstow. But I mean, if you're giving out, you're giving out. I mean, that's the nature of it. I mean, there's nothing to say. Look, if it clips leg stump and knocks the bails off, you're still out, whether it just clips leg stump or not. It's let's face it. But I mean, look,
only slightly knock the bail off. It's not an argument.
Mitchell's start was so discombobulated that he missed the ball.
Yeah.
It hit the stump, got caught by the keeper, and he walked off and didn't review. I mean,
or like Steve Smith in the final. He didn't
review. He didn't review that, and that was he was outside the line, wasn't he? Yeah.
Crazy. Yeah, well, Travis Head, he was, it's very hard for him to tell from that angle from the non-strikers end. Some people said he should have done better there. But what was he meant to do? Smith thought he was out because it hit him pretty much in line, but turned out to be outside off.
Vaguely
but
remember
he walked across the stumps anyway, so he knew that I'm in a bit of trouble.
I think Travis Head quickly turned back his back, walked the other way, as if don't ask me, mate. I'm not.
Yeah, I don't
know.
Not
sure. I'm focusing on my own game.
Well, you've got to plan where you stand as a non-striker as well. Stand tighter to the stumps because you have a better angle of LBWs. It's just common sense. Because you stand a little bit wider because that's just common practice.
Oh, I thought someone like Steve Smith would have thought his wicket was important enough that he should probably review it. But hey, all's by the by. Travis Head went on and got 120, and the game was done. So
so we're going to talk about that a little bit later, the World Cup. But obviously, Bear, the effort that you put in, going into the studio, waking up, you always complain, you always make a fuss, but you do it anyway.
If I didn't complain,
does he ever?
A lot of work. Just explain to us what goes behind the scenes of a broadcast, like all the equipment. It seems a lot that you have to deal with on a day-to-day basis.
Well, yeah, it is now, but it never used to be.
When you did the World Cup for as long as you did, obviously you had help from White Line Wireless, but even that was waking up early in the mornings.
Well, yeah, I mean, now, obviously technology has moved on. You can control things remotely, and now there is video involved and all that. I mean, it all changed during the pandemic, really, because pre-pandemic, people would just come in the studio, and you just turn everything on and you go. And we had old second-hand computers that could handle what we needed to do, etc., etc., etc. And then the pandemic came along, and suddenly it was like, well, if we do want to continue doing this, we've got to find some solution to do this remotely. And then kind of everything expanded. I had to get a COVID loan to be able to, purchase a really up-to-date computer, because suddenly I was having to draw people in from around the world or around the country on Zoom, sit them into a broadcast, as well as then find a way to broadcast television out to people, because not everyone has Sky, and not everyone has, even if they did have Sky, they might have Sky Go instead of Sky Satellite, and
or
Sky
if you're in Australia, you have KO.
Yeah, exactly, and everything's out of kilter and everything's out of time.
Yeah.
I mean, we have had to put up with that, because the problem is, it's not like we have a bulletproof system where I capture the TV and I can send it out on Zoom and everyone can see Zoom and the TV is broadcast perfectly. Zoom compresses everything to the max, and the further you are away, and if your broadband, your bandwidth isn't very good, then obviously it's going to drop from, so it's all a bit of a nightmare. It would be a lot easier if everyone's to still come in the studio, but the flip side of that is we can have commentators from Australia, we can have people coming in from
I guess that's a positive, isn't it?
South Africa. I mean, literally,
everybody, anywhere in the world now, we can have people come in. So it is great.
Hendo and I refer to something, Jack, that we call the 3 stages of bear, and that's when we need some sort of innovation or something done a bit differently, or a technical issue that might enable us to do the show slightly differently or something. The first stage is normally accompanied by a tirade of swearing and grumbling. Then probably within an hour, it'll be a WhatsApp message or a call to go, actually, I've thought about it. I think there might be a way.
It's true.
And then stage 3, which is probably, it can be up to a week, but stage 3 will be, I figured it out. Here, come have a look. I'll show you. So you always get the 3 stages. The swearing, no, there's absolutely no way.
It's true. Well, the thing is, we're trying to
2, maybe, and 3, here it is.
Yeah. Well, the problem is when you're doing, it is, a lot of these things can be solved with cash. And when you don't have any cash, you're always trying to solve problems absolutely on a string with a bit of free software, or a bit of software that costs 50 quid, or trying to buy some second-hand bit of kit that will fill the role that you need to do, even though you could do it much better if you had
definitely
a few more £1,000. I mean, I've thought, there was a point just before the pandemic, in fact, where I was thinking that we needed to move out of the flat because we could get a studio, get a bigger space, get a couple of extra cameras, and actually rent out the space when we weren't using it and create an income. And then the pandemic hit, and everything just went. So
even
it's
for
a bit annoying.
podcasts, will if I'm doing a podcast where I'm really keen it goes right, like the Ricky Ponting one, like one we did this week, but with
Percy Fender.
the Percy Fender story. I'll go to the studio to do those, and then you can get guests in and stuff like that. So it still works to go to the studio, not do everything remotely. I mean, we do fight, and every upside has a downside. So we're gradually getting a body of people back to be regularly in the studio for our game coverage. But people, as in life generally, have realised, I can do this from home. Now, obviously, if you're in Singapore or Australia or South Africa or the US, fine, or the West Country in, say, Annie's case.
We're not expecting you to jump on a plane, go to
No.
But
But there's one or two people, and they know who they are, who live more local and certainly could make it in rather than do things remotely. And we would always encourage them to do that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I suppose things don't quite go to plans like cricket. You plan for something, it doesn't quite plan out, doesn't it? You're always going to have problems and issues and technical problems. Even during this World Cup, you face copyright issues. You have to deal with that.
Yeah, I think a lot of people had a similar challenge. Whatever they were doing, there was people out there looking to make money to erroneously strike people. We do nothing at all illegal, and yet we were and the cats actually did seem to do the trick, I'm glad to say.
Yeah, it's quite annoying not being able to have a scorecard.
Moving in the background, it sort of made me dizzy.
Yeah, we do get that.
Yeah.
My original idea was a still picture. Not quite sure where.
I quite like the idea because I like the idea of moving cats. But even then, you see, so the first thing I did was thought, I'll go on YouTube and I'll nick someone else's video of cats, right? So you go on and you think, there's a video, but then you don't want someone else's branding on it because obviously you think, that's a bit dodgy, right? So then I found this random video of cats. Because you see, the tabbies didn't have any branding on it. It's just about an hour of these cats, a couple of kittens and a mother cat. I thought, I'll just rip that down and play that in the background. And literally, because it's already on YouTube, even though it had no branding and it was just cats, within about 10 minutes of putting that up, they'd gone, content ID tag. And they just put it in. So I had to get Josh to then film his own cats. So that video wasn't on YouTube. Even White Line Wireless was saying, use the video of our cats. But the video of their cats was already on YouTube. So I'd have got a strike for that, even though we were in partnership. It's just like these platforms like YouTube and Facebook offer you the incredible ability to broadcast to billions of people because they've got billions of people following them. But at the same time, they have so much control over you that it becomes really frustrating. I mean, this whole thing with strikes in India just does my head in all the time. It's like YouTube's rules state that you have to be legal in the where you broadcast from. That's all they ask you to do, right? And what we do is completely legal here. It's illegal in India, so they strike you because it's illegal there. We know we're legal here. We can offer a counter notification, so we can go, no, that's right, that's not right. And according to YouTube's legal thing, they have to sue us in our territory, which they're obviously not going to do because they know it's legal. It's all complicated, but then YouTube just takes the side of, you're not innocent till proven guilty. You're guilty until you can prove yourself innocent, and that is wrong. But at the same time, they offer you, if you had to do the video and you wanted, 10,000 people viewing you on your own website, you'd have to have a bloody massive server, a huge amount of bandwidth, and the amount of expense to be able to do something like that would be prohibitive. So it's the price you pay,
Yeah, well, I suppose you have rules, regulations. I've never encountered any sort of copyright sort of problems because I guess it's a bit easier for me because I'm not well known in the cricketing YouTube
world. It's not even that. It's just, I tell you, if you did this regularly in India, with certain graphics, someone would eventually find you. I mean, the type of strike that takes you off air, they do have to find you manually, which is why it took them probably 23, 28 games or whatever it was before they struck us in the World Cup. But I guarantee you, if we'll start off doing it in India for the Test series next spring or in January, and we might get away with a first test. But as soon as they find us once, we'll have to change tack. And
yeah, that's right. Which is frustrating, of course, but you adapted through that, and you got through that, and you were able to put the World Cup coverage out, which was fantastic. It was pretty good. Obviously, quite draining. I would imagine just doing that for 40-odd games and half of them were pretty much one-sided affairs and dead rubbers.
Yeah,
well, and quite early starts.
Yeah, it wasn't the worst though, was it? I mean, we've had worse, and actually, the games are kind of 9 to 5. It was almost like a job, really, actually, for once, because fortunately there was only 2 games we did at 5 in the morning English time, I think, or something like that, and then the rest were sort of 9:30 or 8:30, which wasn't so bad.
Pretty
but
tough.
It's also we're having the partnership with the White Line guys that work really well for us. Like-minded people. They were already coming onto our show anyway, so it's not like they popped up out the blue and we'd said, well, have you ever thought of getting your show back on? And we found in Russ someone who was very keen, had studio space. They've got a lovely vibe now in Melbourne. Looks like a drop-in cafe that they have there. They do their shows. So it meant between the two of us, we didn't miss a beat during the World Cup.
Well, let's talk about the World Cup because I've chosen a couple of topics to talk about, and one of them is the World Cup, and let's talk about that. It was quite an interesting tournament, wasn't it, fellas? Obviously, India losing after being so dominant. They won 10 on the row. They lost to Australia in the final. Afghanistan, the Netherlands did well. Sorry to bring it up, but England did horribly, very poor. As an Australian, it was quite fantastic seeing you in pain.
Yes, I'm sure it was.
But
that's a podcast in its own right, and many people have already done it.
In all seriousness, you want the best teams playing well.
I agree. England were underprepared, massively underprepared. They realised that themselves, and you could look at a whole host of reasons for that. The not enough. It was interesting what warm-up games other teams played and where they played them compared to us. New Zealand were busily warming up in Bangladesh, where we were playing Ireland in the rain.
Not playing Ireland in the rain.
So you can look at the lack of preparation. You can look at the aging nature of the squad. You can look at the contracts discussion. You can look at what Rob Key called overthinking, particularly on a couple of the toss decisions, which were just daft. You can look at the difference between assuming that you can be good at T20 and then somehow it'll all be all right on the night when you turn up to play the longer format. And I think that it just doesn't work that way, and England definitely found that out. And I think all great sides, all the while sitting in the background like Banquo's ghost, you had Owen Morgan more than ready to point out absolutely from his position as a TV pundit everything that was wrong.
Well, I also
having built his dynasty that ultimately won a World Cup for England. The story's a tough one.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the age thing was a bit of a red herring. I mean, Australia's side average age was maybe a little bit older than England. I don't think that was the issue.
Yeah, we had a few older players.
Yeah, exactly. Stark's not young and stuff like that. I don't think. I think the age thing was a bit of a red herring. Definitely unprepared. They didn't play enough games out there. And the other key thing is, at big tournaments, you need big players to step up, and the big players for England certainly didn't really turn up. And that's the big problem. I mean, you look at India and you look at Australia when Head came back, but even before Head, there was Maxwell. People stood up and did the things that they're supposed to do. Josh Butler did cool the entire. Sorry for the language again.
I think Cummins,
but he did. Yeah, Cummins did captain magnificently, but Josh Butler looked all at sea. and he didn't perform himself. And when the captain doesn't perform, I think that sort of seeps down the team. Johnny Bairstow hardly got a start, except for towards the end. Alam was the only decent player. Root had a couple of good starts, but he's a world-class player. Did not very much for the rest of the tournament. And Ben Stokes he was a bit like Travis Head. He came back, but he wasn't there for the first 3 or 4 games because of his hip injury. Harry Brook was expected to stand up, didn't. And then I think for England there were two. I mean, I think they panicked too much after a couple of bad games at the start. They kept trying to find.
I think the game against India, they had a good chance of winning that, and they
should have won that. They stuffed it up. Yeah, but that's because people weren't the players that should have stood up.
They were uncertain. They weren't really backing their ability. You can see that.
Exactly. They used all the available members of their 50-man squad within the first 2 games. England. That suggests you're not quite sure how to approach things. They panicked after the New Zealand game. Yes.
Which there's no need to do.
No.
I think more actually. They panicked after losing to Afghanistan because they shouldn't have lost to Afghanistan. They shouldn't be losing to sides like Afghanistan. But Afghanistan, as they proved, were pretty useful in the subcontinent.
But I think
was pretty good. Their run chasing was clinical in the tournament.
Yeah. Absolutely. In the end, hats off to Australia. I think they started. Everyone said they started poorly, but you've got to remember who they started against. It was India and South Africa, wasn't it? So they got really their tough games out of the way quite early. They then picked up momentum magnificently, and come the final, I think possibly. I think they were magnificently captained. They played to their strengths. They mixed up their bowling superbly. One of the things Cummings did admirably well was manoeuvre his bowling resources, and I think ultimately, possibly, India just fell victims to the weight of their own expectation. They had they'd won their 10 from 10. They'd got the world's biggest cricket stadium packed. They'd got the country's prime minister basically glaring down at them, going, "This is my celebration. Don't screw it up." And they just got beaten by a better team on the day, and that can happen to anybody. It can happen to anybody in any sport, anywhere. And Australia absolutely were the better team on the day. It was like a national disaster. One is still slightly shocked by the gracelessness of the Indian Prime Minister basically chucking the trophy at poor old Pat Cummings and then walking off and leaving. It was almost as if it had gone so sour for them that they all wanted it to be over. And so what should have been a magnificent celebration just wasn't. And I'm sure it was for Australia, but to anyone who wasn't Australian watching that, you just had a feeling of an undercurrent of Indian resentment, feeling that this can't be right. Why is this happening? It should be us. It just seemed to permeate everything that from the final ball to the close of broadcast.
Well, it kind of
didn't feel right.
Wanted to silence the crowd, and they certainly did that one.
Well, they did.
He went into the huddle and he said, "Listen to this. We got him now."
Yeah.
And it was right, because it was just weird, the final. And, in the end, Australia just walked, straight towards the World Cup in the end. But I think India lacked, I think it was, I don't know, was it Andy who said on your broadcast, they were playing to defend and not playing to attack to win the tournament, basically in a final. They were just trying to stay in the game where they were under the pump.
The thing is, like all Indian sides, though, even in the last, they lack the balance, don't they? With Hardik Pandya in the side, they back down further. And the problem with that Indian side, and the problem in the last World Cup when they lost in the semi-final to New Zealand, is that they have an all-powerful top 6, and then it falls off a cliff almost. The difference. There's no sort of graduation as you go down the bowlers, like with a lot of Australia.
Like Cummins and Stark.
Stark and Cummins, exactly. They go down to 9 or 10. They can at least hit a 6 and they can stick around. But you look at Shami, Bumrah, whoever else is there.
It doesn't.
They are a lot of number 11s and a lot of rabbits, 10s and 11s, and it starts at 7 or 8, and that's a big problem for India. So their top order does have to get runs, and so if you can get Rohit earlier. And Gill was out, and then if you can get through KL Rahul and Virat, Sky did pretty. Sky was a bit like Butler actually, T20.
Yeah.
One will consider now a T20 specialist who really didn't know how to play an ODI, and he was at
Yeah,
six as well. So
yeah.
they really struggled when they lost. And I think the pivotal moment for me actually in that final was when Kohli chopped onto his stumps actually.
Yeah.
Because he was on 50 and he was looking like he was going to be able to steer them through. And at that point, because they got off so quick, if Kohli and KL had gone on even another 10 or 15 overs, they'd have still got to around about 300, high 200s, 300, and I think that would have been tough for Australia. But the fact that he just went to cut it down at third man and then just chopped it onto
it was
his
just
stump.
a nothing shot.
Such a story in the body language though when he had done the length of time it took him to process the fact that he was out.
Yeah,
and I think the realization that possibly with him going, so too was the World Cup. It just seemed to dawn upon everyone there that it's not going to be our day, is it?
Yeah, and Shreyas Iyer as well. He scored 2 consecutive tons in no time at all, and he was out for nothing.
Just a very good ball outside off stump, and he missed it. And that was the turning point. And I guess that's in Australian cricket's DNA. We just always have that.
Yes, it's really annoying about Australian cricket. They never know when to lie down and die.
It's that Aussie mongrel. It just keeps you going.
That stemmed from Alan Border, I think. When he came in, changed everything in the 80s with Bob Simpson. He said, right, we're going to be tough. We're not going to back down because we've been pushed around for so long. Because Australia were horrible in the 80s.
Wow, yeah, that was all off the back of the Packer series. That was all off the back of Packer, wasn't it? Kim Hughes crying in England and all that nonsense,
Yeah, and then he stood down from the captaincy, and Alan Border said, "Well, geez, I've got a really big job on my hands." And and obviously, I spoke to Mike Coward, the Australian cricket journalist, and he talked about Alan Border in our chat. Just a great leader of men. He just knew how to lead. He knew how to get the best out of you as a player. And I think that's why Australian teams have done so well under Steve Waugh and then Ricky Ponting in the years to come. And then, Pat Cummins has his critics, as we know, but, he's doing a pretty good job. He won the WTC, retained the Ashes.
Retain the Ashes. Would have lost them. We had a moral victory, don't forget. If it wasn't for the goddamn rain in Manchester, we'd have won that. We'd have come back and won that 3-2. But it was. I mean, that was one of the best Ashes I've ever seen. You think all those games, the ones that were completed, went down to the fifth day.
Yeah.
Last session in the fifth day. Either way it went.
Especially
cracking games of cricket.
Stuart Broad writing his own script for the final day at the Oval was that was an unbelievable piece of cricketing theatre.
Yeah, finishing off in style, he changed the bails around.
Yeah.
As Nathan Lyon and Marnus Labuschagne do sometimes. Well, Marnus is a bit different. He pushes the bails to the side because he wants them to keep them perfectly squared. Whereas Nathan Lyon changes the bails around, just a bit of luck, he said. So obviously Stuart Broader worked for him. But yeah, it was a cracking series, as you said there. The test at Edgbaston, with Pat Cummins doing what he did.
Yeah.
Like, how on earth did he do that?
I know. It was,
and then at Lords, Ben Stokes doing what he did. He's like Superman.
Or nearly did.
Nearly did.
Yeah.
Wasn't quite 2000. It wasn't quite Headingley 2019 in the end.
No,
it was.
You knew it was just a little bit too far.
But he's just such a. I don't know. There's something about him. I know a lot of people like him. A lot of people hate him, but you got to admire he's a pretty good cricketer, even though he's playing on one leg.
England's a better side when he's in it, except the only caveat to that, I think, is if you make a decision, possibly it's best to stick to it and to prolong his career. He said, that's it, I'm done with one-day cricket. And then he said, oh, no, maybe not, I'll come back. Then that threw seeds of doubt about where was Harry Brooks rolling the team, so they didn't. And then, of course, Ben Stokes wasn't fit. So, in amongst all the other things we've talked about, there was the sort of the Stokes situation became an obsession. And when he came in, he did play a couple of rescue innings for England. He did get his head down and realise that a 50-over game is not a 20-over game, and you had to bed in a little bit. So I don't think you can blame him personally, but I think there was an unhealthy distraction around him that wasn't necessarily his fault. It wasn't his fault, but nonetheless it was there.
Yeah. But what was your observation from this World Cup? Do you think one day cricket's going to survive into the future because it's very uncertain?
I hope so. I've heard so many different theories that it may become 40 overs. There is such a predominance of franchise-based T20 cricket. I think done right, then ODIs are a fantastic format in their own right, and I would want to preserve it. And I don't think you'd see any of that Australia team that got that World Cup thinking what they'd won had been devalued in any way, and nor should they. So my hope is that yes, it does continue. I don't have an immediate answer as to how you fit that in with the rest of the pressures of the global schedule, and that's what led England to make some, famous Meatloaf quote: 2 out of 3 ain't bad. World T20 champions, a pretty good Ashes, a completely reinvigorated Test format. Something had to give.
Yeah.
When we won in 2019, our focus was all on being ready for our home World Cup. We were probably okay-ish at T20 and terrible in Test results. So, managing all 3 formats is difficult, but different countries will probably have different priorities at different times. I hope they find a way that you don't lose it.
I'm slightly different. I'm not convinced necessarily by ODIs anyway. I mean, you think about how many games at that World Cup were actually close. There were hardly any.
Yeah, well, there was a couple. New Zealand, Australia was 5 runs. Pakistan, South Africa was a wicket.
There were,
I'm trying to say.
No, I mean, out of
top
40,
4 was already
40
Pakistan qualified. They needed a miracle. Same with Afghanistan.
Exactly. I mean, I think if you are going to do it, I think, part of it is the amount of jeopardy there needs to be for bigger teams. England were out early and that was painful. But I mean, other teams need to be in a similar situation. I mean, the fact that, in the past, teams like Pakistan and India went out in the group stages way back when, and that's when it changed to, they argued and changed the format. So I don't think you can do that. You have to have the jeopardy, and you have to go in prepared if you're going to do it. It needs to be shorter. 6 weeks is interminably long. A World Cup should be no longer than 3 or 4 weeks.
Have more teams than 10?
Well, you could have more teams, shorter groups. Everything has a game on. Everything has something on it. If you only have 4 teams in a group, and 2 teams get 4 groups of 4, so you're 16 teams. I don't know.
Yeah.
4 groups of 4. Each team plays 3 group games. After that, you've got to get it right from the start, or you can go out, and then you have a bit of jeopardy. It's much more fun that way. It's much more fun. It's much more fun for the viewer, even if you're a supporter and you go out. There has to be jeopardy in a competition. You can't just have what essentially worked out to 5 weeks of hardly any jeopardy at all, and then 3 games that have jeopardy on them, because at that point you're just waiting for those last 3 games essentially, apart from the odd game that had something on it. Could they still get through? And a lot of it you're just getting through the process.
Well, that's a very good point you make there. So something for the ICC to look at.
They tried to introduce the timing of the announcement of Champions Trophy qualification was made, I'm pretty sure, to introduce some jeopardy to those teams like England, sadly, at the bottom.
Well, then we ended up cruising that as well, didn't we? I mean, you think England might well have got into that quarter for the 2 games that. I mean, this is it. I mean, going back to why England performed badly. I mean, they did perform badly, and they performed well at the end. So they obviously needed more practice, because actually they got all right at the end. They'd have beaten Afghanistan and they'd have beaten Sri Lanka, and they're 2 of the weaker teams in the tournament, and ended up above. We didn't end up above Afghanistan, sorry. But those 2 games would have ended up with 10 points. We might well have been in the semi-finals. That was the difference.
That's right. And there was still a chance at one stage England were qualifying, but I was like, how did you come to that conclusion mathematically?
But it was a very long shot, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. So it'd be interesting to see what happens from there. Our last topic for this discussion, guys, that I wanted to talk about, and we've talked about a bit with it in this chat, is about the commentary today, the state of commentary in cricket. Seeing that we've been talking about that, and we've mentioned a few things about that. Obviously, TV, radio's changed a lot. the style and technique of commentary has changed, from the Richie Benos or the John Arlett's, for example, back in the day. People seem to be fed up with how the game's commentated in the modern era. That's why people go over to Guerilla Cricket, because they want something different. So how would you assess the state of commentary today? Do you think it's good, bad, could be better, or do you think it needs a bit of a shake-up?
I think mixed. There are still some very, very good, knowledgeable, interesting, fun commentators. If I look to Australia, then I'll always put Jim Maxwell as my example in that group. I'm a massive Jim Maxwell fan. I think he's funny, dry. He's got an off-the-wall sense of humour when he needs to. But I think against that, because there's so much cricket, the more you increase the volume of something, you quite often decrease the quality. And I think you've seen that in commentary boxes, certainly on TV.
Yeah.
And
I would say that with the BBC as well. I mean, I listened to some of the World Cup commentary, and the BBC used to be so good. But I mean, I was listening. I mean, I had Dan was around at my house the other day. Norcross came around to see me, and the final, for example. I mean, I don't know who's. I expect better from the BBC. But when I was listening to the final, when I was driving around, I had a quick listen to them in the car, and I asked Dan. I said, "Was Michael Vaughan in the studio?" Because for the BBC, the mix from the stadium noise and who was in the studio, it sounded like voices have reverb on and things like that, which you wouldn't expect in a live situation and all this. And I just thought the BBC's commentary service had gone drastically downhill. And I thought, half these people were in studios, not at the grounds. I couldn't really tell, and you should be able to tell that kind of thing quite easily. So that was my gripe with the BBC, and Toad's right. I mean, some of the TV commentators are just not puke-inducing, basically. And there are good ones.
Like, Matthew
I
Hayden.
think Matthew Hayden's really annoying. And see, I like Ricky Ponting. Can't stand.
Yeah, he's
Hayden.
good.
I think Ricky Ponting's excellent. I think Aaron Finch, if you want to look at a very new to the commentary box, he seems to be.
Playing Watson as well, just to throw his name in there.
Watto is terrific. So don't not for a minute are we anti-ex players. There are some phenomenal ones, but equally, I think too often there is an agenda to promote that overwhelms the agenda, which should be to communicate what's going on. And we see that. Oh God, do we see that in the 100? Every 2 minutes you get reminded in a very shouty voice that this is absolutely fantastic. You won't see this anywhere else.
No,
when someone's just
by some guy you've
every
never heard
ball
of.
counts. Well, as it does in any format of cricket, it just may count slightly differently, So I think there is a little too much agenda or desperation to promote, which leads to an assumption that what people want is loud and shouty, and possibly the scales have tipped too much towards loud and shouty and a little bit away from informed and intelligent conversation.
like
Richie Benos used to have back in the day. Richie.
Yeah, but he was absolutely. Anybody who thinking, goodness knows. I mean, I'm prone to errors, many of them. But I mean, one of the best things you can ever read is Richie Benos' commentary tips, and it applies as much now as it ever did. One was concentrate fiercely.
Yeah.
Two is don't use the word tragedy. The Titanic sinking, that was a tragedy.
Yeah.
Nicking off at 17 for 1, that's not a tragedy.
Well, Shane Warne getting out for 99 isn't a tragedy. Like Mark Taylor learned the hard way.
Yeah. So I think the summary is ubiquity, volume inevitably leads to a decrease, and that decrease means you get a lot more mixed, and you combine that with a tendency to overly shout and promote, over communicate, has meant that generally there's been a lowering of standard. If that works in our favour, I'm thrilled, and we're certainly prepared to stand up and admit our own errors and lack of perfections.
Yeah,
but I think we avoid a lot of those things.
Yeah, because you do the job properly. You're old school in a way, but you put your own spin on it.
Some of us maybe. Yeah.
Yeah.
There are younger gorillas, who may take issue with that.
Young guys, you can even walk out and play today. You're still pretty young. No. What I was trying to
Bear
say.
can still bowl in the IPL. He'll tell you all about it.
Well,
He'll go for 8 and over.
I can go for 8 and over in the IPL. Easy.
Just floating them up there, Bear, with your.
Absolutely. Get a bit of turn. Yeah. I left arm spinner.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah.
Just bowling a few pies.
Yeah, exactly.
But my bowling will be dispatched in IPL cricket. Medium pace, not much pace, bowling probably 100 kilometres per hour, maybe even under.
Medium.
Put a bit of cut on it. I'm sure you'd survive.
Well, I try to. But nothing happens off the pitch. It's so bloody.
But it does in India. You see, that's the thing.
Well, we need to prepare some pitches that turn a bit, seam a bit. I've seen some
wickets that's the problem with Australia, isn't it? Yeah, roads in Australia.
Hard and bouncing in Australia. You stand there in the field for 40 overs in the comp that I play in, which is a one-day match. Hot as well in the Australian summer, like 35 degrees plus, nearly 40. And we can't even get a wicket. They're scoring runs. You're like, can we just get a bloody wicket here? And wrap it up because I want to go and put my feet up. Because it's just flat. It's just, nothing in the pitches at all. And that's why people complain about the MCG pitch, because I said it's an absolute road. That Ashes test where Alistair Cook got 200.
Oh,
yeah. He would have still been batting right now.
Was that the 517 for 1?
Yeah.
No, that was at 2010 level at the Gabba with Trott and Strauss. Yeah. But this was in the 2017-18 series when he got the highest score at the MCG. That was a flat pitch. But you need something in wickets, like in modern day cricket, T20 cricket, like this recent T20 series with India and Australia. Just about every game they scored 200. That's it. Very heavy, one-sided towards batting.
Yeah.
I question whether they should be playing that in a way. I know a lot of them are different players. It's typical of the world now, particularly cricket. You've played what should be the pinnacle of the game. You've 3 days later, you're putting a team out to play another game.
Well, that was exactly the same thing, wasn't it?
That doesn't seem to be respecting a final that should have its space.
Well, no, that was exactly the same, wasn't it? After we won a T20 World Cup in Australia last year, like 3 days later, we
played 3 ODIs that we got pumped in all of them, and possibly you could point to that. There was the downhill slide.
Australia just, they were knocked out early in the tournament, qualify. So, even Travis Head. You look at the photos of Travis Head. He partied long into the night. He did.
Yeah, I'm sure they did. And why not?
Sort of like you. Absolutely plastered and didn't know what he could do. And then you have to play for Australia the next few days after a World Cup 100. So But,
do you care? Probably not.
Yeah. But I digress. Well, guys, thanks for joining me today for this discussion. I've really enjoyed it. It's been great speaking to you guys about Guerilla Cricket, about cricket. I think we had a good chat today. Would you agree?
I've thoroughly enjoyed myself.
Yeah, I had a good time as well. I hope everyone listening had a good time as well. Learn more about Guerilla Cricket. But before we go, guys, where can people help out? Where can they donate money? Because Bear, you said we need funds to keep the whole ship in operation. So where can people do that?
Well, it's nice if people go to patreon.com/Guerilla Cricket. That's our favourite thing because it gives us a regular income. We have bills to pay every month. Not massive bills.
You do get a lot of advantages with that. You get our regular patron-only podcast. You get a regular newsletter. You get some of our merchandise. You get the chance to appear on our glory roll that goes across our YouTube feed and a whole bunch of other things. Access to the archive and stuff. So so there's a whole host of advantages that we try and give to people to thank them for that loyalty. That's for sure. You can super chat us during broadcasts. That's become very important. So that works fantastically well.
You just donate by PayPal. You can
buy merch.
You can buy merch.
Go to our website. It's a fabulous merch.
Redbubble. Yeah, exactly. You can go
Not
through
quite
the
sure
website.
what we're going to do with the Marlon
Samuels.
T-shirt now.
It's still there.
Are we doing a discount on them?
No, we're not.
Should.
What else do we do? There's lots of things you can do. You can just donate through PayPal. Do anything you like. Send us some money.
If you run a business, we can promote you.
Yeah, you can sponsor.
We did Ricky Ponting, and he was happy.
Exactly. There's always sponsorship deals.
That should be good enough.
Yeah.
Former Australian cricketer, captain, promoting his own wines.
And
exactly.
We took them out around the country. We did a roadshow for Ricky, and he was thrilled to bits with it.
Yeah.
He ordered some messages to take to different cricket clubs, which was very kind of him.
Yeah, well, yeah, but anyone who's listening from a business point of view, sign up Guerilla Cricket.
Exactly.
If you want sponsorship, they can plug your business or anything. So.
Well, certainly. I mean, on Patreon, you can sponsor a series, I think. For that, we can big you up, put up your logo on the screen and all that sort of stuff. So it's all cool.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, thanks, guys. The description of this episode. Everyone can check out what group. Before we go, everyone, remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, and click the bell to make sure you get the next episode of the podcast. And be sure to like and share our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. Most of the podcast is available on Anchor, Spotify, and on Apple Podcasts. Once again, thank you, Bear. Thank you, Tony, for joining me for this cricket discussion today. I thoroughly enjoyed it. We had a great time. And we just drifted away speaking about cricket. And that's what it's all about, isn't it? Just a couple of mates and sitting back, just talking about cricket and solving the world's problems within the game, as many people do.
Thanks for having us, Jack.
So, thank you for joining us, guys. And thank you, everyone, for listening and watching this episode of the podcast. Until next time, keep safe and bye for now.